Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles, and welcome back to the full card breakdown. This time for UFC Vegas 92, we have ourselves another 12 bout event here. One back in the Apex, after an electric last weekend. Let me just say, it was so fun to be able to go out there and watch some crazy fights, watch Derek Lewis, watch that head kick by Ribovich, that quick knockout by Ulberg. It was a great night. I had a lot of fun doing so. Maybe missed a couple of my reads there, but you know what? It was a truly fun fight. So for all those debating going out to an event, I mean, that St. Louis crowd was electric, and I do think they are really fun to see in person. I look forward to the next one. And before we jump into this one, a couple things I want to mention. First of all, this one's an interesting card. Not my favorite one on paper, which honestly sometimes delivers, but truthfully, it's harder to find that optimism I typically do. Tough week. So please be sure to check me out on Twitter @GamblesGordo to see where my final plays land up. And second of all, if you're new to the channel, please remember that this channel is free, is fun, DraftKings betting, whereas you can find my premium work on the Establish the Run channel, where you can find a podcast, ranking, projection, all that kind of fun stuff for some premium DFS content, as well as I do work with CoolBet for a best bets video, which I should put out at the end of this week. Without wasting any more time, let's talk about UFC Vegas 92. Let's do this. Get the fight night started with the 13-8 Emily Ducote versus the 10-5 Vanessa Demopoulos, and this kind of really sums up the card. A lower level WMMA fair, one that we do have a very big favor on the Emily Ducote side of things. It's an interesting one. It's not one that has the most enticing matchup for the rankings. Neither of the girls I think are fighting for a belt anytime soon, but you know what? It's a fight. We got a bit of a striker versus dynamic grappler, and I hope it does go out there and deliver. Demopoulos, we know her. She is going to be going forward, very, very tough, phenomenal ground game, loves the jump in the arms of the commentator at the end, fun style, but she's gotten some robberies because she is just so active. No defensive security on the feet, is very hittable, is allowed to go out there and lose minutes that way, and because her opponent was able to dominate her on the mat last time in Murata and not finish her being the more active, kind of just being a little psycho and going out there and just swinging at all times, helped her win that fight. A close one, but she in theory was doing more damage because Murata was just controlling her, not landing here. Because yes, although Demopoulos is a good grappler, a very good on the mat, she is someone who only averages less than half a takedown for 50 minutes, not much of a wrestling game, not much striking defense. She does have her holes, and that is why Ducote is the bigger favorite here. Ducote is that proven prospect. She is someone who is going to have better cardio, is the much better defensive and offensive striker on the feet, and someone who I do think has a physicality edge to keep this upright. Even on the mat, she does her black belt herself. I don't think Demopoulos is going to go out there and steamroll her, and I do have to agree with Ducote being a favorite in this spot. The much better striker. She could go out there and make it look very dominant, with her being the much faster striker and being someone who I do trust to go out there and win the minutes that way. With that being said, I don't want to really play her at this money line. I don't know how the props are necessarily going to play out in such a lower level affair here. You can also never really trust her at 9.2K. I mean, Ducote, 2 wins in the UFC, never scored more than 85 points, is very, very, let's say, predicated on a volume-based decision. Not the biggest grappler, especially not in this matchup, and someone who, although lands over 115 strikes in a couple of her bouts, doesn't have the knockdowns, the finish equity to go out there and outscore people around her. I much prefer other plays, whereas Demopoulos is a bit of that pump play. Her path to victory does really require, let's say, submission upside, because I don't think she wins at a decision at a high clip, and I don't think she's the better striker. So she's a punt play, not my favorite one in the world. This is not necessarily my favorite fight to target. Next up, 16-9-2 Alatangheili versus the 8-3 Kletzen Rodrigues. I do actually not mind this fight, 135. Kletzen Rodrigues is a guy who I'm personally high on. I made a bit of money on him, and he has faltered a bit recently, 1-2 in the UFC, but a tough debut against someone in Vergara who will go forward, and then Boshrod is just, we've seen to be a good level. I do think there is more to see from a guy like Kletzen Rodrigues. He's still young. I do think he is going to be the much more explosive striker in this one. I do think he is a skilled fighter. I don't think he's someone we can necessarily push over and say he's done after having these 2 losses. I still think there's room for him to improve and to be someone who can put on fun fights in this division. Alatangheili's been in the UFC for a while. 4-2-1 within it. I mean, a pretty good record that way too, but someone who is not necessarily the easiest fighter to trust at all times. We know he does have wrestling ability, has landed more than 2 takedowns in 4 of his 7 matchups, but not necessarily when he uses it too often. He wrestles a lot in that 3rd round, not very much early, and on the feet he is someone who is extremely durable, will continue to go forward, but someone who is a bit slower to the punch, and someone who I do think will lose the striking exchanges to a guy in Kletzen Rodrigues. And although in theory Alatangheili is going to have a potential wrestling path to victory, like the grappling of Rodrigues, like the fact that he's not actually going to be undersized in this matchup like he was to Boshrod, and I do think it's a spot where I'm going to side with Rodrigues. I know Alatangheili is a popular pick, considering how durable he is, considering how he might have a ground advantage, but I think Rodrigues is a much better offensive striker. I think he's someone who can compete in the mat as well, and I think people are putting shame on him for losses that I don't really hold too much against him here. I do think he's the better fighter, and he is going to pick to win the spot. If the line continues to close, I'll be playing him myself. DraftKings wise, I'm not too high on this matchup. Although I like Rodrigues, Alatangheili is super, super tough and durable. I very much see a Rodrigues decision, and if that's the case, there are people on this slate who can score much better than him. I think this is more a contrarian second option play. Even with Alatangheili, he has shown to be, let's say, not as reliable to wrestle. Aside from his quick win bonus, has never scored 80 points in a win before. So not really most reliable on DraftKings either. I would also pass on this one. And man, speaking of passes, I mean, the 14-3 Ariana Carnelossi, 9-1 Pierre Rodrigues, I don't really tell you to play these fighters too often. But honestly, I think I'm maybe more excited for this one. You know, Ariana Carnelossi is someone who, although I don't have the biggest faith in her skills, is someone who is extremely athletic. I love watching her fight. I made a good bit of money on or against her. And she's someone who, you know what, I'm excited to see step in the cage. I mean, she is extremely built. I wonder what she looks like after USADA, and is someone who does have a ton of power. She does have a huge hole in a few aspects. First of all, the ground game, she can be taken down. Although she has the power to knock out off anyone's head, she can also be hit. She can be touched on the feet, and I do think she is someone who does have her flaws. Against someone who is more tactical. Pierre Rodrigues is that person. I do think on the feet, Pierre Rodrigues' kicks to able to manage range. Her trips and takedowns within the clinch are going to be able to cause problems here. I do think she is someone you can go out there and favor. But when it comes down to mental errors in the cage, Rodrigues still makes them. When it comes down to pure physicality, Carnelossi is not someone I necessarily want to go after too much. Although I'm picking Rodrigues, and I do think she has all the tools to look dominant here, I'm not so certain she does. So if that's the case, I'm picking her to win. Don't know if I'll get them the money line. And it's a very interesting matchup from a betting perspective because it could go a multitude of ways. DraftKings wise though, I like this one as a sneaky one. 8.8K, you know, it's never that pretty. She scored 92 and 80 in her 2 wins. Maybe not that good, but we have seen Carnelossi destroy the map. We saw Lupe Godinez put up on north of 130 points against her there in that matchup. And I do think Rodrigues is someone who does have a potential wrestling path to victory. Carnelossi is easy to take down, but does like to fight her way to her feet. And if Rodrigues is struggling to manage range against someone so physically imposing like Carnelossi, maybe takedowns are the way, and maybe that's where she can have success and score well on DraftKings. So I do love her as a pivot play, this mid-range at 8.8K. It is a very tricky week, but if I have to compare her to a Clitzen Rodrigues or an Emily Ducote, like we've talked about so far, she's my favorite play of the bunch. Good contrarian. I like her wrestling upside. She's fun. Carnelossi on the flip side of things, 7.4K again, punt play. In her 2 wins, she scored 105, 112. When she wins, it's often with that power, that physicality, being a dominant fighter. And if that's the case, she's someone who I do want to play at 7.4K. Lots of upside. Harder just to trust those overall prospect. Speaking of hard to trust, 14-7 Warley Alves, 25-6-1 Abus Magomedov. Really interesting matchup between two fighters who definitely have their defensive flaws. Both these fighters have historically been very, very explosive, someone you cannot really bet against because they have the opportunity to finish fights at any time, but people who fall off a cliff. You know, Warley Alves finishes a lot later on in fights. Abus Magomedov gassed out in the second round against Sean Strickland. These are two fighters who historically have not been that trustworthy, but are very, very dynamic in their own right. However, the difference is Abus Magomedov is going out there and losing to Kyle Braulio and Sean Strickland. Whereas Alves, 1-4 in his last 5, losing to Wells, Dalby. I mean, some decent losses too, but I do think that we have two different, let's say, tiers right now. Not only that, is I just think that Abus Magomedov is the A-side in this matchup. He is someone who is striking I trust a lot more, and although he has tired out being controlled on the ground, I haven't seen Alves be able to go out there and do that for 15 minutes, and I just think Abus Magomedov has more opportunities to win this fight as it goes on. Although his cardio is still a question, I think I like him more than Alves, who does gas out down the stretch, and on the feet, Magomedov is extremely explosive, where I've seen Alves knocked out before. All these signs point to Magomedov getting back into the winning track after facing those big matchups. He got those matchups because people see him and regard him as a decent prospect here, and I do think he gets back to his winning ways. I'm going to pick him to win. Don't know if I'll get the money line because that line is wide for someone who is relatively trustworthy, but I'd rather play that on DraftKings. 7.2K and 9K, phenomenal salaries for a fight that is projected to end inside the distance. In the one win, Abus has scored 128 points. That's phenomenal. Whereas Alves, 7.2K, in his wins, last win scored 116. Before that, 83, 92. Like, he is someone who has the opportunity to be very explosive and put up big scores. And for that reason, I want both of them. Magomedov, very good GPP play because he is explosive. He can finish fights early. Great finish rate. And someone who I do think has opportunities to finish the fights the same way that we've seen Alves has finished in the past. So give me Magomedov to win this fight. Interesting one due to their level of reliability, but I'm picking up Abus Magomedov. Next up, 7-2 Tamiris Vidal, 8-2 Melissa Gatto. Not much to say on this one. -410 favorite for Melissa Gatto. And yeah, I'm picking her to win, but I don't really think she's necessarily someone to be trusted at this price tag. When we look at the matchup, Vidal, I don't think is necessarily the cream of the crop here in the UFC. She's someone who is just slower to the punch, someone who can be controlled dominant in the mat, someone who I've seen finish before, but someone who does have a ton of power, someone who is pretty physically imposing, and someone who I do think can beat the lower level of competition in the UFC, just not someone that I think Gatto is. I think when it comes down to volume, hand speed, even especially ground game and wrestling, it's all Gatto here. And I do think she is someone who wins this fight at a pretty high clip. However, with that being said, Gatto coming up a weight class here in this matchup, someone who I do think can be hit. There are paths for Vidal to have success. I just don't think they're too often. So to sum it up, I think Gatto wins. I think she's better everywhere. She's not someone I really want to trust at this price tag. Although she may be a level above, minus 410 for a lower level WMMA affair. Kind of similar to the Ducote side of things. I don't really want to go out there and pay for that. DraftKings wise though, it's very similar. 9.4K, of course, there is a path to dominance for Gatto. I mean, she scored 117 against Leonardo in her debut. She can be very violent, and I do think she has a clear ground edge over Vidal. But 9.4K, I mean, paying for her over Yanez, Magomedov, even Rodrigues, who I've talked about already. I don't really necessarily think that I want to pay up that much. If I'm paying up that much, I'd rather get a Nolan. So she kind of falls into that contrarian play. Huge pivot off the top end. Someone who does have a path to victor dominance. I mean, she is minus 410, but not someone who I do think has that same round one domination, KO upside that a Nolan or a Magomedov have. So contrarian option for her. Vidal, 6.8K. I think she wins more often than Martinez, but with a lack of volume, a lack of grappling upside, she's someone who is really KO dependent. And although it is a path, I think it's sub 10%. And for that reason, I won't be getting to her too often at 6.8K. Next up, the short notice replacement. 10-3 Tokkos versus the 9-0 Umar C. Fun matchup. I do think this one's gonna be able to deliver. I mean, we have two light heavyweight prospects making their debut. There's a lot left to learn about them. But I think there's also a lot of question marks around both of them. I mean, the short notice replacement for Tokkos, someone who was knocked out by my beloved Ming Yang Zhang, the true love of my life. But someone who has recovered since and who is held to a pretty high regard versus this 9-0 French prospect fighting KSW, having good success there. I do think it could be very, very fun. From what I've seen on tape, I am going to side on the C side here. I do think he is someone who, although has phenomenal wrestling, and yes, who does make mistakes on the ground, is someone who I just think is well-rounded. That wrestling is good. I do think his striking is very underrated as well. And if this fight does play out on the feet, I do favor him over a guy in Tokkos, who also is a primary wrestler in my opinion. Tokkos has those knockouts on his record, but he does like to go out to the ground, have success there. But the main reason I like Umar here, though, is just because I do think he's going to be the better defender of the two. On the feet, I think he's a very good defensive striker. I've seen Tokkos knocked out cold, willing to engage in the pocket, and I do think because of that, I trust the chin and the defensive skill set of the feet more of Umar here, but also on the ground. Tokkos is someone who I haven't really seen defend takedowns too often, whereas Umar, I've seen defend takedowns, look pretty good at that if he wants to remain on the feet. And because of that, I think he has more paths getting it done. I am picking him here, being the younger fighter, being the fighter who was originally supposed to fight in this card, a guy who is, you know what, pretty highly touted. I know he makes mistakes in the grappling. I know there are flaws around him, but he is someone who I am going to pick to win this matchup. No DraftKings salaries, we can't talk about that there, but super fun matchup. I mean, if C wins, he's going to come with potential grappling upside of his own right, but also knockout upside. These are two big boys going at it, and I do think he is going to be a popular option as price tag. Now, although I'm not picking Tokkos here, has potential grappling upside as someone who can mix in the wrestling. Both of them, depending on their salary, can be good options this week. I am picking C, but I will be excited to see where they end up. Make sure to check out my other content to see where I side with them. Next up, 6-1 Tom Nolan, 13-5 Victor Martinez. Not much to say about this one. I'm picking Tom Nolan. It is a setup fight for him to go out there and have success. Victor Martinez is not the most reliable fighter. I mean, I bet Jordan Leavitt against him, and I thought it would come by wrestling, but he's got knocked out. Getting knocked out by a guy in Leavitt there. Nolan has a ton of power. He is a guy who was highly touted before being upset in his last matchup, but I think they're just looking to get him back on track. He's a guy with a ton of power in his own right, very long frame, and although Martinez has decent fundamental striking, I still think Nolan's gonna be the quicker boxer. I've seen Martinez hit way too often to trust him here, and even on the mat, I do think the length and pressure of Nolan is gonna be too much. Give me Nolan to win this fight. Weirdly confident about him because he is still a green prospect who has his red flags, but I do think he wins at a high clip, is the A side of this matchup. DraftKings wise, Nolan is a clear payoff option. If you have the money to go up and get him, I do think he has a very high ceiling this week. Round 1 KO upside, quick win bonus upside, knockdown upside. He is expected to go out here, win this fight in the first round pretty often. And if that's the case, 9.5K, he has a very, very high ceiling. There are an interesting amount of underdogs this week. I mean, none that I trust all too much, but some that are viable. So sometimes you can't get up to them. I do think there are still reliable options in Rodrigues and Magomedov. But if you have the salary to go up there and get him, he is someone who I do like. He is my favorite play on the slate. Shall you have the salary to do so? But I wouldn't really sacrifice everything to go up in there and get him. There are worlds where Martinez survives the first few minutes. Nolan gets like a second minute KO, scores like 95 points. Does that make optimal? Who knows with that salary? Still, I think he wins at a high clip. His ceiling's there. If you can get him, go up there and get him. On the main card now, 16-13 Angela Hill versus the 11-2 Luana Pinheiro. Another one where I'm not too high in either one of these fighters. I mean, Angela Hill I've been very critical on just because she fights so close. She is someone who, yes, has got a lot of wins, but She doesn't really excel in many of the areas I'd like to see from someone who has been a perennial contender, and for that reason I have been a bit harder on her than maybe I should have been. She doesn't really have the best offensive wrestling game. She has a ton of volume on the feet, but not much like power or moment winning upside, and because of that, she has lost some close decisions. Pinheiro, 11-2. I also haven't been high on her. I bet against her before, not only with Ribas, but also with Marcos. That was a DQ, so we're not talking about that one too much. But the Ribas one, I thought that Ribas would have had the ability to go out there, put pressure on her and finish her late. I cashed a nice round 3 ticket against her, because although she is very explosive, has a good ability to work early on, is someone who can still tire down the stretch, is someone who can still be hit, and someone who I do think is an unfinished prospect. And that's really what it is it's prospect versus vet. It's someone in Angela Hill who has a ton of volume, a ton of experience, a ton of cardio, who can fight 15 minutes, versus this young, explosive fighter in Pinheiro who has a ton of power, can win moments early, but may struggle as the fight goes on. And if that's the case, as my boy Liam says, ABC's always been on cardio, I am going to side with Angela Hill here. However, I do think this is close to a 50-50 affair. Before doing this, I would have personally lined this fight around -130 Angela Hill just because I can trust her to go down the stretch. And as this line continues to climb, Luana Pinheiro becomes more and more enticing. Although I'm not picking her in this matchup, theoretically, she is someone who has a ton of power to win moments. She is someone who has the wrestling to cause problems for Angela Hill, who can be stuck on bottom and could be very dangerous. So if this line continues to climb, I may have to take the shot on Pinheiro here in this matchup. With that being said, don't want this matchup too often. If I had to play any of them on DraftKings, 7.9K, I will pick Luana Pinheiro just because I do think she has more finish and grappling upside. Hill has a ton of volume, but at 8.3K, I think they're a better option on the card. I mean, she put up 76 against Yoder in that matchup there, 70 against Godinez. She is content to strike from range, and although it can help win her fights, especially in this matchup here, I don't necessarily know if it goes out there and outscores a Williams, Gorimbo, or Murphy who are right around her. So I'd much prefer the Pinheiro side as an underdog with grappling upside. So the pick, gun to my head, to be Angela Hill with her cardio, volume, and experience here, but as a line continues to climb, I do think this fight is very, very close, and I would not fault anybody for taking a shot on Luana Pinheiro. Next up, 16-5, Adrian Yanez, 14-6, Vinicius Salvador. This is a very, very fun fight. Yanez, the prior baby of the UFC, had a ton of boxing power. He was big on social media. I mean, people love him, and that's because he is not only a phenomenal boxer, but a very likable guy. I like his skill set. A lot of power, a lot of early finishes, and that was all kind of derailed last time by Rob Font, who is just, a level above. Adrian Yanez is still someone who's making these improvements, but I still think this is a spot for him to go out there and realize more success. He still has that phenomenal striking game plan. He still has a ton of power in his hands, and he is still someone who is a fan favorite. And I do think in this matchup here, there's a reason why he's such a big favorite over a guy in Vinicius Salvador. Salvador's 0-2 in the UFC. I think he's pretty well-rounded, fun kicks, decent submission game, but can be stuck on bottom, can be hit in his own right, is going to be slower in this matchup. He's just someone who just doesn't excel at much, and aside of having a really weird haircut, isn't going to be beating the high level of this division. Now, is Adrian Yanez necessarily that high level? Maybe not, but I do think in this matchup he's going to have the better boxing. I think he's going to be able to hit Salvador at will. And unless Yanez gets grappled and then gasses out, I do think it's his fight to lose. I do think he's the better striker, more accurate, more powerful. I do think he gets it done. DraftKings winners, though, is where I have issues. Historically, Yanez has been a phenomenal scorer. In his last win, scored 114, 70, 105, 81, 107. So some mixed opinions in there. But still, we have seen him have the upside to have round one knockouts and score very well in doing so. The issue why I'm tentative to get to him is because number one, the one fight that did go to decision, he scored 70 against Grant there. We've seen Salvador be extremely durable, so if it's just a volume-based affair, it's tough to trust him. I mean, Yanez is extremely boomer bust in this matchup, so that is a fear behind getting to him here. He could very much win this fight in the second round and not score the same amount we want him to, so he's very scary in that way. But it's because I'd much rather have Nolan. I mean, if you have 9.3K, I'd rather pay up if I can get there. I do think that there is a difference in level opponents for Nolan and Yanez, so give me Nolan in that matchup. But I just think he is nothing but a pivot play this week. I do think he's going to have some ownership with him being Adrian Yanez, a big name this week. So if I have enough to get to him at 9.3K, I'd like to get Nolan at 9.5. Yanez is a fine play, but he's just extremely boomer bust. And if I have to pick a side this week, I do prefer the boomer bust option of Tom Nolan. Next up, 10-4 Ramiz Brahimaj, 12-4 then but Gorimbo. And I actually really like this matchup. I have bet on Brahimaj before. He has let me down. He has won me some money. I've been hit or miss with him. Whereas Themba Gorimbo's been the talk of the town, a guy everyone likes. The Rock gave him a house, right? There you go. I got all that stuff. But it's a fun matchup because Gorimbo has been a very, very potent offensive wrestler so far in the UFC. A guy who just likes to use that repetitive takedowns and look to win fights that way. Whereas Ramiz Brahimaj is a phenomenal grappler, a phenomenal submission game. I mean, that's how he got both of his wins in the UFC. And then I do think a guy in Gorimbo can make mistakes that allow Brahimaj to win this fight. I've seen a lot of love for Brahimaj, and I understand people playing on a big number. I mean, getting the line down, I completely get it. Very dangerous on the mat, and someone who can capitalize off the mistakes of Gorimbo. but I still can't pick him to win this fight straight up. I don't like his striking. I don't like his cardio. I don't like his heart in there. And if there's one thing Gorimbo has, it's heart. I know there's going to be a time to fade Gorimbo, and it might be this time. I mean, he might just stick his neck out and get choked out. But when it comes to a guy going out there pushing through adversity, a guy with the longer limbs who can go out there and maybe win the striking exchanges, it's going to be a guy Themba Gorimbo. And I do think if I had to pick a winner, there's one gun to my head. I think Gorimbo can win more minutes. I think he'd be the more dangerous striker of the two, and he's someone who I think is still making improvements. Whereas although Brahimaj has the opportunity to win by submission, he is also very boomer bust. Because of that, though, maybe my favorite matchup target on DraftKings, 8.4K Gorimbo in his wins has scored 130 and 113. Not only does he have takedown upside, but he does have long limbs power to take over on a guy in Brahimaj who is hittable and who is tired on the stretch. That's for sure an option for scoring well. Whereas Brahimaj, I already told you, is 2 wins, a round 1 sub. He's round 1 sub or bust, and in those wins scored 98, 104. Both of them, I think, score really well in their win conditions. I do think this fight ends on the distance. I do think it scores very, very well. Give me the winner. I'm picking Gorimbo, but it should be a very, very close fight. One of my favorite on the card. Co-main event, we have the 14-3 Chaos Williams, 19-5 Carlston Harris. I also love Carlston Harris. I love his style, love his forward pressure, love his wrestling, but this is a really tough matchup for him. I do think Carlston Harris has all the tools to finish a fight at any times. Phenomenal front headlock series, decent striking on the feet, good wrestling, but at 36 years old, I do think it's tough to get a guy who is as powerful as Chaos Williams and who is as defensively sound. I think if we look at this matchup, Carlston Harris is going to have the ability to have ground success. He's got a phenomenal ability to go out there and land takedowns, and he is a fun, aggressive fighter to watch that way. But on the feet, he is hittable. He has lost minutes that way, and I do think, although he has decent power in his hands, he lacks the technicality that Chaos Williams might have. Williams is a phenomenal striker in his own right, a ton of power. I do think he's the better. I think he's sharper also defensively in this matchup, but someone who also has an 80% takedown defense. The only guy who's been taking him down so far has been Michel Pereira, only controlled him for a minute. So he is someone who I do think has the ability to keep this on the feet, and if that's the case on the feet, I do favor Chaos Williams. He should be able to hit Carlston Harris way more often. Although he's gotten decisions recently, let's not forget he has a ton of power, can knock anybody's head off, and we have seen Carlston Harris knocked out cold before. So I'm picking Chaos Williams in this spot. I do not fault him for taking Harris. I think he's got a path for sure. Dangerous submission game, we saw that against Wells, but a spot where I do think I have to go side here with Chaos Williams, and what is a pretty fun co-main event. DraftKings-wise, another phenomenal fight to target. Carlston Harris, although he only got 50 points in his last win, one where he was taken down the whole time, has shown his 3 wins before that, scored a 112 against Gooden, 110 against Kasaganai, 93 against Aguilera. He has a ton of upside to go out there and land takedowns, has a dangerous submission game. I do think his path to victory is rooted in either grappling or finish upside. Whereas Chaos Williams, I mean, we have seen him knock out quick win bonus before. 129 against Morono, 127 against Razak Al-Hassan. Has not been coming up as much recently, but his power's there. We've seen Harrison knocked out. I do think Williams has a path to the optimal line himself, but he's also boomer bust. GPP play at 8.2K because he needs that KO to go out there and win that fight. I think he can get it. I think he's very dangerous, has a ton of power in his hands. I'm picking to win, so I'll be having more of him than Harris, but both of them have their upside. And last but not least, 24-11 Edson Barbosa, 13-0-1 Lerone Murphy. Fun main event. Not necessarily what I would picture as a main event, but one that I do think is a tough one to call. Edson Barbosa getting up there in age. I mean, we all wrote him off a bit ago, 38 years old, but in this post-USADA era, he necessarily someone you want to be drawing for a main event. He's huge. We all know he's a phenomenal kickboxer. He's got 5-round experience, and he's been at the top of the division. Lerone Murphy, undefeated, but a guy who fights very, very close. A guy who has a very well-rounded skill set, someone who I've liked watching recently, but maybe not the most potent finisher, maybe someone who I kind of want to see more from. Has fought a very close but smart game plan, mixing in takedowns, scoring, knockdowns even in spots like that, but a guy who has fought close and who should put up a very good fight here. I do think it's one that's extremely close. I think if we're talking about line value, maybe there's some value in Barbosa, but I do think it's one where the path is there for Lerone Murphy. It wasn't long ago that Barbosa was a guy who was taken down a bunch by Bryce Mitchell, underdog to Billy Quarantillo, knocked out by both Chikadze, and pretty much knocked out by Yusuf in that first round. I think Lerone Murphy not only has the striking and, let's say, ability to keep it close in the feet versus Barbosa, but a clear ground advantage, has power in his own right to potentially knock out the lights of Barbosa, and I do think we should be favoring him in this matchup because of it. To this extent, maybe not. I mean, Barbosa has more experience and is someone who could probably win the decision with the striking here, but I do think it's one where I'm going to have to pick Murphy to win this fight. DraftKings-wise, though, I think both are viable. Murphy's scary to back because he's been historically a decision machine. He's someone who necessarily hasn't scored that well in his matchups, but with 5 rounds to work, with grappling upside, I do think he's someone I want to target 8.5K. Whereas we just saw Barbosa go out there and score 128 in a 5-round decision win. He has a ton of volume. I think he's going to have to be winning the striking exchange with volume to win this fight because I don't see him knocking out Murphy too often, and I don't see him grappling Murphy. So it's going to be him landing volume and potentially a late finish. So if that's the case, Barbosa is very live himself at 7.7K and is someone I'm looking to play. Gun to my head, I'm picking Nolan Murphy. Fun fight though, so I could see it going both ways. However, I just think the clear grappling path is there for Murphy, so I'm going to pick him. So that's going to do it for me here on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. Let me quickly run you through my quick picks. I'm taking Leron Murphy, Chaos Williams, Themba Gorimbo, Adrian Yanez, Angela Hill, Tom Nolan, Umar C, Melissa Gatto, Abus Magomedov, Pierre Rodrigues, Clifton Rodrigues, and Emily Ducote. Pretty chalky week for me, honestly, not going to lie, but I'm not going to force any underdogs. If I had to pick an underdog to win, I'll probably either go with Edson Barbosa or Luana Pinheiro. DraftKings wise, favorite fighters target are Gorimbo, Brahimaj, Williams, Harris, and the main event. Up top, if we go tier by tier, love Tom Nolan. I think Yanez is a very fine pivot. And I also like Magomedov and Rodrigues, Pierre, that is. In the mid-range, I like Murphy, Gorimbo, and Williams as underdogs. Harris has upside, Pinheiro has upside, Brahimaj has upside. And I think if you want to go out there and punt, Carnelossi, Alves, and Vidal are all live punts, but I think it's a mid-range week. I think if you can get up to Nolan, get him, but truthfully, the upside lies in who you think wins in the Gorimbo, Brahimaj, Murphy, Barbosa, Williams, Harris matchups. I mean, if you could pick underdogs there, that allows you to build a bit different. I do like them there. Reignmakers wise, Tom Nolan, Adrian Yanez for sure as my favorite options. And I think I'm going to go with Pierre Rodrigues, Abus Magomedov, and then the winner, Gorimbo, Brahimaj. I'm going to pick Gorimbo there. Betting wise, nothing locked in yet. Check me out on Twitter at GamblesGordo to see the full slate there and what I have to say on the Cool Bet Twitter. That's going to do it for me here on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. Make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel, show some love. I appreciate all you guys tuning in. Let's make some money, guys.